So, this is Artist Muse, Dana Haynes speaking. And I'm going to talk about this piece. Kind of have a goal this year to talk about each art piece, at least each fractal art piece that I did, and give you my idea of what it means to me, or what I was thinking or feeling or trying to express. The cool things about fractals is, um, everybody kind of gets their own. It's kind of like abstract. Well, it is abstract art. It's sacred geometry all rolled into one. And, everybody kind of gets their own feel for what a piece means. So for the last decade or so, I've just put them out there, but I haven't really said too much about what I thought of each piece. I just let them speak to whoever was viewing them. And, I had some interesting feedback. But about the time that I did this one, I don't know, somewhere between 2011 and 13, um, to 13, somewhere in there. I think this is one of my later ones. Um, I would sit and listen to feedback from, you know, people that were enjoying the piece of art. And, I had a couple stoners say, well, it reminds me of a pot leaf. Well, it might, but it's nowhere near identical to a pot leaf. And, but it just kind of, that's the vibe they got. But at the time, I was running my studio. I was kind of focusing on my family portrait studio. I was kind of focusing on connection, and I had recently just watched Across the Universe, kind of about the Beatles, and I was thinking about the Beatles and, just how good they were at speaking to a universal level to humanity, and them being adored for it, that they really could connect. And that's kind of what this piece is about. One of those days when you're sitting maybe outside in the pool, or, we used to go, what's it called? Well, we call it tubing. And we used to, I'm showing my age, back in the day, when you could actually do this, they'd take truck inner tubes and fill them up, and you'd float down the river in them. Or now you gotta, have all the proper equipment and everything else. But it's kind of one of those lazy days. It's not too cold. You've gotten just past spring, and it's starting to go into summer, and the water's warm, but it's not too hot. And, it's just the perfect condition, and you're just kind of floating around, moving your arms, and, enjoying nature. And that's kind of what this piece is about for me. One of those moods, one of those days, that you just can breathe it all in, and you're connecting on a, like I said, a universal level with nature, and just feeling its vibe and its beauty, and, soaking it up. So, this is kind of what the piece is about for me. Others have, like I said, stated other things. But I just ran across something that I want to do for other artists. Even if you're just a buyer or collector. Um, I had a tendency to, when I was art, just turn on the radio and let whatever play. But and kind of get lost in a piece of artwork, you know. And I still can do that, but what I'm finding when I do, like, work on my website or something like that, that takes some time, because I'm posting a bunch of stuff on there that, I haven't had time to do because I was busy with photography. Um, So basically, I'm sitting there and I'm posting, I'm listening to podcasts that have a certain mood or effect, and I'm like, this is perfect for drawing to, or listening to. And not every artist that on YouTube you can do this with, but some just have the right tone, and you can get lost into listening to them. And that's kind of what I want these art art speaks about this. Dana speaks about this art piece or that piece, to kind of be like, or my art muse, talks where, if you are creative, that you can just sit down and connect with me and vibe with me, and we talk about certain topics. And I tend to ramble, so this shouldn't be a problem. In the last two talks that I did, I'm trying to, do I want to do it to a soundbar? Do I not want to do it to? Do I want to do it to a piece of artwork? Well, boy, that puts a lot of pressure on me to make sure I'm putting in. I do big pieces like 4x4 murals and stuff that take quite a long time. So, you get what, one every 6 months or so if I did that. So right now I'm just going to talk about the pieces, and I'm going to migrate them into just the art muse and me speaking about the art piece in front of you separately. But for now, I'm going to do them together. The last one that I did was on the topic of visualization, and the latest was self-talk and how those are important to you. And a lot of this is, this is stuff that I want my kids to listen to. I've got two that are artistically inclined. One's more leans towards music and one more towards art. And, I do this just to kind of assure them, if something happens to me, yeah, they can sit and listen and hear mom's voice and things I would have liked to done after my grandma passed. Just sit and listen to her voice, you know. But this piece, it is about connection. It is about, connecting to something bigger than you. And, the topics that I bring up are artistic topics, but they're also, you find these happening, especially in art careers, quite a bit. But they also speak to just, humans go through this anyway. It's just maybe more pronounced in the art community because we have to confront it to do art. So, one of the topics is not being good enough. And I kind of am stepping you through the process that I would train a new photographer in. I would take them back and I would explain, various ways, the structure, a pose. Our family said, triangle or a square or a diamond, or, and give them a rough sketch, and then, stand with them and demonstrate that for them, and me connecting to the customer or the subject. And a lot of times they were little, so you have to be good with kids, or you have to be more willing to connect, is to do this sort of job. And I think a lot of the times, artists, because I'm a traditional artist as well, we kind of get lost in our heads, you know. Well, when you're in studio, one of the things, and I guess this helped me in my own traditional art as well, because I finally got done a mural that I had in my head for quite some time and just hadn't got to. I did a different one instead. So um anyway, I'd step them back into the portrait part of the studio, and this is like, there's two sections to it, which I've kind of delved into before. There's the technique, and then there's the sales part of the session that you work with the customer on. But there's an in-between that, between you taking the photos and actually sitting down with them, where you do the editing process. And basically that's when I would give them feedback on what they can improve on, what they could work on the next session, so they could build those technical skills. Because here's the thing, art, photography, no matter what kind of art you do, you can always improve your skills. And, you'll max those out at a certain point that you've conquered it. So this sales process, going from the photo shoot part of it to stepping over to the table to do the editing. Editing is when I would sit and I would talk to them. I'd let the customer go walk around the retail center we were by while I trained, and I would give them feedback. And what I noticed was they were really nervous about showing their work. Even me, or looking at it, or really high anxiety, going through I'm not good enough yet, and being scared of when the customer comes back and they would have to sit down and go through the sales process with them. So there was two things that the new hire would have to get over. Was one, fear of failure, and two, fear of rejection. And if you have any kind of social anxiety, that can be like compounded. I even went through it when I started. I knew I could take the photos, but I didn't know that I was quite portrait status yet, that it was good enough or great enough to be sold. And there was a fear there for me that I was going to fail at the next step. And what this amounted to was you had to show your work. And when you're going through, you get about 5 minutes to edit your work. And you don't get to do much to it. You get to enhance it a little bit, but it's not so overblown. You have to take the pictures correctly to begin with for them to look good. And I found, like with this piece and the Beatles and all that if I connected really well with the subjects, that the photos were true portraits. They were outstanding. But I had a 5-minute window in there where I could like pick myself apart on every little thing that would go wrong. And the new hires do it quite a bit. Beat themselves up and I'm not good enough, and me having to reassure them that they were more than good enough. It was a matter of them overcoming their own anxiety and fear. And, it sometimes had to be, well, what are you afraid of? Are you afraid to show them? Are you afraid of the sales process, that you're going to, not be able to communicate well while you're going through the process? Or are you afraid that your photos weren't good enough, or, quality enough, that, they're not worthy of being bought? And try to narrow down what they were thinking and take steps to overcome that. One of those steps was you couldn't go a day without doing at least, usually 3 sessions. Bare minimum if it was a really, really bad slow day, because there are summer days like that, that everybody's out doing activities or got other things to do, that they're not coming into the portrait studio, and pulling them in is harder because they 4th of July and all that, they got other things to do, and they're not, most people really aren't thinking about photos unless it's birthdays or some celebration or christening or something like that. They usually tend to think about them more towards the holidays. So having to narrow down, are you sure-footed about your technique, you've got your technique down, you've got a routine down, you know how to do this, versus just anxiety in you that you need to overcome. And which anxiety is that? And I myself, I knew it was that because it was the same fear that I had sitting in a classroom desk when I was a little kid, afraid to, I was an extremely shy kid. And I'm really fair complected, so if I blush or I turn red, I turn red. There is no ifs or there's no hiding it. So it was something that I had to overcome when I moved into a new school system and making friends, and you know, not let myself be bullied or let my anxiety take control, that I, snapped back or inappropriately or something like that. So I had to learn to really work on my social cues. And, you know, you could tell, you know, if it was anxiety about their work. And this translates into traditional art as well. People are afraid of showing their work. And instead of doing it's not good enough, which a lot of them do, they'll turn it back on themselves and I'm not good enough. Whereas the way the process was set up was so, it kept that to a minimum. You only had so many minutes you could look at something and pick it apart, and you could note it. You had enough time to note it, so the next session that you did, you could improve on that, but you didn't have time to really beat yourself up over it. Your customer would be back from their walk or their shopping moment, and you would have to sit down at the sales table with them. And whether you liked it or not, you had to show your work. There was no ifs, ands, or buts or getting around it. You could toss out a few that were bad or, mishaps, but, you had to have so many photos, well, minimum of 9 to 12 photos that were good, even if it was a difficult customer. And the process gets easier each time you do it. So, the less beating yourself up you do. Oh, well, I could have corrected that. I'll take care of that next time. Or that was just a fluke. This particular piece or session was this way. Not every one of them. And over time, you learn that not to take it so personally. But a lot of artists have a hard time connecting when it comes to the sales process. I mean, that's our job, is to connect to the emotions of the people, our subjects, and mirror that back to them in print. So it can be high anxiety until you get comfortable with that process. And the best piece of advice that I could give other artists, photographers, is look at something for 5 minutes and walk away from it, and give yourself 5 minutes to think about the piece separate from yourself. It's not you're a bad person or even the art is bad. It's what could you do to improve it. 5 minutes, and or what would you do differently on the next piece, and make a mental note to yourself, I'll remember that for next time, and not get stuck on it. With photography, you don't have the luxury of getting stuck on it because children wear out, and usually the first infants and newborns especially, first 5 minutes of you having them, they're usually kind of wore out from you even moving them around or messing with them. They want their mom and they want to go back to sleep. And I was pretty much all about spontaneity and capturing that and the smiles and, getting them to mirror that back to me, and putting that energy out to them. So this piece kind of talks about that connect. when you put energy out, it comes back to you, sort of thing. You know, if you've got a vibe, and you know, if you're Debbie Downer, you're not really going to get smiles and giggles. And in the middle of season, you simply just don't have time to be Debbie Downer. You're usually packed. Every Christmas I worked, it was back to back from the time you got there to the time you left. But what it really boiled down to, this in between, you separating your technique from your sales process, is there's a time period in there that you could really beat yourself up and call yourself a failure even when you're not. And with the internet, doing art and posting online, just do it. I sound like a Nike commercial, but just do it. Just show your work. You know, try to take steps to protect your own copyright and all that, but don't use it as an excuse not to show your work. There's all different levels of artistic ability out there, and yours is probably not near as bad as you're beating yourself up over. The cure for the anxiety that you're feeling is just to do it and get pushed past that fear. It's a natural one. It's not a real one. And then there's the fear of rejection. A lot of the time, you know, my new hires would go into this having to do their first sales by themselves and try to remember what to say and how to say it, and they go into it just scared of rejection, just like that little kid that I was, afraid the whole classroom was going to laugh at me or something. Usually you got one or two people sitting there looking at it, and the internet honestly isn't any different. If you know, I went through a decade, well, before I took the photography job, of putting my fractal artwork out there and listening to feedback. And with art, it's a little harder sometimes, to any art, traditional or otherwise, that you've took some time to work on. It's sometimes hard to listen to some of the feedback. Most of the feedback I got was really positive, but sometimes there was one show, it was just, the girl gave me a really, like I said, fractals, you can see what you want to see in them as well. So they're kind of like ink blotters, you know, you can see something different in abstract art, you know, depending on who you are and how you look at something. There's one piece that, and I'll probably speak about this later on, that I look at it and I see like emperor or king sitting on a throne, and my daughter sees a penguin. That's how extremely different some of these fractals can look to different people. So that's kind of why I put the artwork out there, but I didn't comment back too much. I listen and tell them thank you, and you know, I appreciate you commenting on it and stuff, and let me know what you think. And then I take what they said, and then I go looking and go, oh, I see where they're kind of coming from. And then I would see my own piece in 2 or 3 different ways. But with online art, you know, I was actually connecting. It was much easier 10 years ago on Facebook to connect to people about artwork than it is right now. Talking to them about it. Right now, I mean, I kind of let the momentum go down because I was busy running the studio, that, you know, I didn't post as much or consistently like I should. But if you can consistently post, you'll overcome the fear of failure or rejection. Unless, you know, I found the more people talked to me and the more they were paying attention to it, the more my anxiety kind of went up, because oh Jesus, I got this many people looking at it. And it wasn't a lot, but I did have social anxiety when I was younger, and it would kind of pop up, and I'd have to each time, okay, there's 10 looking at it now there's 100. Oh boy, you know. You know, and each time kind of going increments as that went up, people connecting to it, responding to it, that, you know, it kind of, I felt a little bit more guarded. And this went back to what I was learning about training people going from the photo session to the sales table, is was I was afraid of the rejection that I might get. And really the only cure for that is to step through it and get it. You'll end up with enough responses to your artwork that you either know you have to go back and work on your technique more, or that your technique's fine and you'll get positive response back. You'll know whether it's technique or, but what a lot of artists do is they'll keep focusing on the technique because they're afraid of rejection, especially on let's just say it. Facebook was kind of brutal there at the beginning, you know, with people all attacking each other. You know, there was this time period I was glad I was in the studio and interacting with customers and getting smiles every day instead of dealing with people lashing out at each other. And I didn't receive a lot of that. I got positive feedback for the artwork I did, and it reassured my confidence level so I could do it again. And each time it got a little bit easier showing another one. And I did this for a whole year straight, that I made a point of posting a new one every day. I'd work on one all day and then post it towards the evening. So my fear of people rejecting me, or so anyway, sorry about that. Phone interrupted me. It happens. Um, anyway, about rejection, I went through increments of, you know, I would have moments where I would get all shy again, all over again, and catch myself, no, you need to post it. And it really wasn't the artwork. It was a social anxiety that I had when I was a kid that I hadn't really experienced. And I've only had that come up a few times, and it had nothing to do with the artwork itself, because the artwork was good, and I definitely got the reassurance I needed that the artwork was good, but there were, you know, some people lashing out here or there on Facebook, and I was going through some family stuff at the time, that, you know, there can be, depending on what kind of artwork you do, so, you know, like Facebook won't let you post nudes or anything like that. So, you know, if you do figure drawing or painting or anything like that nature, you could be concerned with, you know, is the wrong person going to see it, or this or that? Is it for mature audiences or no? And, you know, worried about your art being rejected because of that. I kind of have a potty mouth once in a blue moon that you know, I have to watch my P's and Q's and, you know, how I'm talking to people. But I'm for the most part, I was always good about that in studio. I just had to curb the way I spoke sometimes to not using swear words. um, Online, because I had studio people actually hooking up with me on a different Facebook page, and, you know, I wouldn't swear at them or in front of their children in the studio, so I wouldn't do it online. So some of that stuff, you know, it's just baby steps to, you know, and some common sense to get over socially, so you don't have as much anxiety. But the more artwork you put out there really is the cure, because the more feedback you get. My first month, or well, we'll say my first 2 weeks at running the studio, was high anxiety. One, I was way invested into, oh, I finally got a paying job where I can be creative and, wanting to do well and, you know, and over, what's the right wording for that? And over anxiety about, I have to, this is make or break, I have to do perfect at this, and kind of writing myself, and then having, the social anxiety kind of come up when I walked onto the sales table. So that 5 minutes, you can pick yourself apart pretty good in 5 minutes if you let yourself. And that's not what that 5 minutes is for. That 5 minutes is an honest, objective critique of your work. And I can do this better, I could have done that better, or, I'll do this next time, and maybe I can go, but if it's traditional artwork, maybe I can add a couple more things to it, and do your last minute perfectionist kind of critique of it, and then you let the piece go and you show your work. And for years I went into web design because, well, if I'm not good enough, and I would say that to myself, well, if I'm not good enough, I can always do this. Or if I'm not good enough, I could always teach. If I'm not good enough, I could do, and I actually did a personal mural of my own, and it's a lot of wording on there. And I actually put on there, you are more than good enough. And when I catch myself saying you're not good enough or I'm not good enough, I reroute my brain and go, no, you're more than good enough to do this. And trust me, I know anxiety is a real thing. I've had it on different occasions and parts of my life. And if you're really struggling with social anxiety or something of that nature, maybe you might need to speak to a professional. But I do know that, at least in my case, that you could overcome it, or I overcame it by, well, when I was a little kid, well, I'm just going to raise my hand more in class. If I know the answer, I'm going to raise my hand, and if she calls on me, I'm just going to muddle through it until I'm good enough. And, you know, um, it's that same kind of mentality that, well, I'm going to go say hi to the next 10 people that walk into the door. So, I feel more comfortable talking to strangers. My studio was in a fairly busy Walmart, so, you know, going out and strolling around and making myself get over the anxiety of going out and introducing myself to a perfect stranger was something that I got really comfortable doing. But, the first 10, 20 times I did it, no, it was really uncomfortable. It's no different than practicing a technique that you put on pen and paper. That, you go out and you do this, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, and the more it flows. And, back to this piece and it being about connection, the more I did it, the more I connected. But the first couple weeks was just extremely stressful for me. And I know there are artists that struggle with these two, fear of failure, fear of rejection, quite a bit. And this kind of ties into the last talk I had. If you're constantly telling yourself, I'm a failure, you're going to seek those things out instead of you have to consciously look for ways to reinforce, I'm not a failure. I am good at this. I am more than good enough at this. And for me, one of the feeling rejected part was, well, I didn't make a sale. And stepping into the sales table, I had really high anxiety. It wasn't even the speaking part that I was having anxiety about. If they didn't buy it, you know, those first couple of times, I took it as a personal rejection of me, not the photograph or whether they had enough money to actually buy it, or, you know, because they would sit there and tell me, I love these. I wished I could. I just can't right now. And, you know, me having to learn to ask more questions. Well, when can you? Or when would be a better time for you to purchase this? And I found getting comfortable with sometimes the silence while they're sitting and thinking and processing whether they could buy something or not. I just had to get comfortable with knowing that's what they're doing, and it's not personal, the quiet. You know, if you keep talking, you're going to talk yourself out of a sale, you know, because you keep interrupting them, you know, and part of connecting with another person is allowing them time to quietly process what they're thinking. And that's connection. And it doesn't have to be this anxiety provoking process in your mind. Oh my God, what if they don't buy it? Oh no, I'm going to, you know, that kind of thing. It could be knowing that they're sitting and they're thinking about it, and they're not thinking, no, I don't want it. They're thinking, I want it, but how am I going to pay for it? Which is totally different than I reject you and I reject your art. Now, I recently had a girl come in. She came in with my daughter in the middle of me painting or drawing a wine glass, and she offered to buy it, and I was like, well, this is how much I want for it. And she sat, and if I hadn't had that experience of sitting with somebody while they were processing, can I pay for that or not, I would have took all that personally as some kind of rejection of my art, when in fact she loved it. She just couldn't afford it. And, you know, I have learned to value after 5,000 some odd sessions and doing this, that my my art is worthy of being paid for, and my time is worth something, and my skill is worth something, and, you know, let her process if she can actually afford me. Now, I could have dropped the sale and made the sale and sold it for, you know, a third of what it was worth, but you do have you after doing this enough times, you do begin to understand the process, and that 5 minutes is just 5 minutes of me editing and finishing it up and putting the final touches on it. It's not a drawn out, beat yourself up session. The other thing about this piece, and while I was thinking about the Beatles and stuff, the Beatles had so many #1 hits. Well, once you have a #1, I imagine it gets easier to do a second #1, or a third, or a fourth, or a fifth. Or once you get past the block of, well, I had one that really sold, now I got to do the second one that'll really sell like that. Once you do that enough times, it becomes you get very good at it. And this piece is also about that whole process of the universe will give you something when you're ready to actually learn it. And that studio job came on the tails of me actually I'm putting my artwork out there. I'm going to show it to other people. If they like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. And I'm going to do this. You know, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, this is something that I've got to get past. Because the real failure is not even trying to put yourself out there, accepting failure before you've even tried. So the universe kind of landed me that job at the perfect time to teach me to go forward into the sales process and understand it, where I didn't have anxiety, where it got down to I'd done it so many times that, I went into another job later on, which is slower paced. And there was a girl, and you could tell she had anxiety. And, there was points where she was coming to me. She'd worked for this company for 10 years, and I was beating her on sales, and she was sitting over at the other table, beating herself up because you're new and you're outperforming me. And then I'm like, it's not that I'm new, because I probably have done more sessions than her, even though she had a longer time span in there. I've worked in some of the busiest malls in America. So, um, sitting and talking to her and her crying, and I can relate. There's been times where, I was just on the verge of my website finally making money, and, I was pulling in the traffic finally and had worked through keywords and, getting noticed by Google, and right on the verge of it, to have it all kind of pulled out from underneath me with a divorce. And, you know, how frustrating that can be to want to give up on yourself and say you're not good enough. And she was plenty good enough. Her photography was good. It was, she still had anxiety around selling it and talking with people and connecting with them. In the internet, honestly, it can like compound that sometimes, because, let's face it, if I draw a nude or something and my sister doesn't approve and gets on the internet or on Facebook and starts shouting at me to take something down when it's pure art. I didn't do a nude or anything. I'm just saying, if I did some artwork they didn't approve of, I know there was a poem I wrote that was pretty, telling somebody off in the poem, and I had to get the emotions out there, but it was an artistic expression for me. And no, I'm not going to take that down. And it's plenty good enough. You're taking it too personally and doesn't have anything to do with you. You need to be able to take that step back, and especially if you do a piece of, fractals aren't like really offensive. Abstract arts, I mean, some people hate abstract art. I've had people that hate abstract art going, no, I generally hate modern abstract art, but I like yours. And me go, that's a win. Because honestly, I used to hate abstract art. So I could relate to them and understand that feeling of, yeah, I get what you're saying about this. But, it can be anxiety provoking to put a poem or a piece of artwork, or, some photography out that's a little bit controversial, and worried about the social backlash from it. When you're on the internet, if somebody sees it, you're lucky. It wasn't the algorithms have changed. Before, if you put something out consistently every day, the social networks would pick you up and show your work to everybody because you were consistent. Even that isn't for sure anymore. So you could be sitting there with crickets on, nobody's even looked at it, and beating yourself up, going, why isn't anybody liking my artwork? It went from, I don't know, I have about 700 on my Facebook page from back that 6 months or so that I was actually posting every day. And it went from those 700 could all see it to maybe 10, if I'm lucky, see it. So you can look at the engagement and you can see how many are actually really viewing your work, and take it a lot less personally, going, no, it's not me, it's the algorithm, and you know, the ones that do see it do like it, and it reinforces the confidence that you need to put your artwork out there. So every time you step over your anxiety into, you get a little bit more confident, not cocky, but confident that your artwork is good, and you get rid of that shadow part of yourself that's saying, I'm not good enough. Even with me, as long as I've been doing art and kind of went down the rabbit hole like a lot of other ones. Well, I got to learn this and I got to learn that and I got to learn this and this and this because it's the internet age. That, you know, there was a point in there I'm like, you know what? I learned probably, I was on my sixth or seventh language, computer language, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just not doing this. I'm not going to keep relearning the same thing over and over again, because I'm losing my focus. It's becoming less and less about art for me and more about something that I'm not even sure I enjoy doing. And I kind of went through that with, um, there was a time period I didn't post anything on any of my social pages for a couple of years, or quite a few years, because I was busy doing photography and I was actually interacting with customers. And one, it wasn't that I didn't need to, I just thought that it was kind of getting overblown and everybody kind of getting um, mad at each other for no reason. And so I just kind of stepped out of it. And then recently I'm like, okay, well, you know what it takes. You got to go back to the consistency. And now that you're going to focus on something, you know, work on your technique and get it to the point that you know it's good enough, and then start showing your work. That way you can start connecting, because you can connect to people on the internet. It's just way harder because you don't get the visual clues when you're looking at their face. And sometimes those visual clues can be a complete distraction. I mean, I could have took somebody sitting and pondering whether they had enough money in their checking account, all wrong as, you know, they just didn't like me or they didn't like the portraits I did, when that wasn't the case at all. You know, you need to, like I said, be able to step back objectively and, you know, view your artwork as something separate from yourself and something you do. And, you know, you're a totally different person from that artwork. You know, they're two entirely different things, although you may have produced it. You know, you do get a scope after having done something enough that, yes, I'm good at this. And, you know, so I had a bad day. Or, you know, this kid, it was nap time, and, you know, there's no way you're going to take good photographs of a kid crying, which, believe it or not, some people have done. And made a national campaign out of it, ironically. You know, so it's just, um, like I said, it comes back to connecting and making sure that you're being objective when you connect to other people. Um, that you hit that place where everything's just kind of smooth sailing, and this is kind of what this piece, you're just floating, and it goes smoothly, and you stop worrying about it, and you build your confidence enough to where, and that's what I admired about the Beatles, and that's kind of why, you know, I was listening to the Beatles a lot during this. And thinking about all that, and you know, the universe just kind of, and this is kind of why it's called Across the Universe, or Universe, just kind of floating, you know, through it and with ease. And when I got in a groove, in a routine, and was posting a new fractal every day or a new piece of art every day, you just get in the flow. And, you know, depending on how many people are seeing it, you know, you can respond to the comments and, you know, feel good about yourself. in your artwork. A lot of artists want validation. The reason artists need that validation is so much so they can get past the I'm not good enough stage. And it's real easy to get on here and see all these other people that are really good at art and get intimidated and do that I'm not good enough, when that isn't the case at all. Maybe you need to work on this technique or that technique a little bit more, or maybe their technique is they just do one thing and they're really good at that one thing, but you're trying to work on 20 at one time and you're not focused enough to get past the I'm not good enough stage. You're leaving yourself kind of mediocre with everything instead of getting really good at one thing. So there are ways to overcome the I'm not good enough. You're more than good enough. And if there is somebody, I had ex-boyfriends or whatever, kind of trying to get on my art page and flirt or whatever, and you just kind of going, not here. Don't. This is about my art. This is about my career. This isn't about me tickling your ivories or anything like that. So don't, there's a bunch of different social situations that'll come up, artist scams and everything else to be wary of. But don't take it personally. Know that there's a real human being behind that, usually. There are bots, learn to notice when it's a bot bothering you or whether it's actually a real person, and take that person's feelings and to consideration, but stay professional. And part of staying professional is being objective about your own work and not, you know, you being a good boss to yourself. And imagine you were, say, the Beatles or something, and you had that one big hit, Hard Day Night or whatever, and you went on to, you were trying to move on from that, and it was your next big piece, and then your next big piece, and and still connecting to your human side. Part of photography, family photography, is being human. Your job is to play clown sometimes and get in there and make a little one giggle or laugh or, smile. And, one of the great rewards of that job was I got paid twice something that was priceless, which I got paid in smiles every day. Which, believe it or not, I even noticed health-wise that, it perked me up and made me more outgoing. But don't give up on your art, or connecting to other people. Try to find that still, calm place in yourself, like when you're doing your art, or like looking at this piece, that tranquil part of yourself that can objectively go, yeah, I could use a little improvement on it. For the most part, this is pretty good. And go with it instead of fighting yourself so much. And it does get to a point where, if you practice a daily ritual like we had, you had to do so many sets, you had to practice so many a day, whether you made a sale or not, was, I mean, that's the point of it, but not necessarily. Some days are just about practicing a skill and getting a technique down, or making sure that you're not getting rusty on something. So think of it in those terms. If I can just work on this a little bit every day for the next year, I'll have built something by the end. And that's kind of, the Beatles kind of did that one song at a time, and I kind of done it. I've lost full portfolios, and before I would panic. Oh my God, I lost everything. And then, you know, by the second or third portfolio, I'm like, well, you're going to make more art. Don't worry about it. You know, you kind of get that way at going into the sales table. Well, you know, thank you. Don't, you know, for letting me be a part of your day, and I'll see you when you come back to buy it or not, you know. And this whole piece is just kind of that smooth sailing vibe that you get when you know you've hit your groove. I have a system, I have a routine, I'm in the groove, I'm in sync with the universe, and you know, and that's pretty much a wrap on this piece. And you're more than good enough. Um, put your artwork out there, and I'll see you on the flip side.